자, 이제 마지막 주제 세션인데요. 자, 이번 세션은 글로벌 경제 위기 시기에
Now we'll begin our last session, which is on reinventing startup investment scheme to grow startup ecosystem and to vitalize economy. We'll explore various policies. First up, we have moderator Professor Chun Sung-min, who's the professor of business administration at Gachon University, and Mr. Kim Gun-dong as our panelist, managing director of IMM Investment, and also Mr. Bae Min-wook, general manager of commerce strategic planning team of CJ-ENM. Because of personal issue, he's joining us via Zoom today. Now I'll give the microphone to the moderator. Thank you very much. I am Chun Sung-min, a professor of Gachon University. This is the last session. I heard from the organizer those who remain until this last session will be entitled to some gifts. So we'll start. These are very difficult people to invite. They are very busy people. So I'd like to introduce them. Would you introduce yourselves one by one? Good afternoon. My name is Kim Gun-dong. I'm involved in venture investment. I originally began as a designer. However, now I'm focusing on investment in venture capital, venture startups. Also, I'm David Kim, director of the Plug and Play Korea. It's a venture capital company located in Silicon Valley, and it has invested in the initial stages of various startup companies, and we are operating accelerating programs so that these startup companies can continue to run. Originally, I worked at the headquarters of the Plug and Play Korea for 3 years, and then as the venture situation got better, I came back to Korea last year and is operating our company. And Mr. Bae is joining us via Zoom. Good afternoon. I am General Manager of Commerce Strategic Planning Team of CJ-ENM. I'm in charge of M&A and investment. Thank you for inviting me. As a strategic investor, I could give you some opinions. Thank you.
This session's topic is reinventing startup investment scheme. In Korean, if I literally translate it, in the global economic crisis, how to streamline the startup investment ecosystem. Are we having global economic crisis? Some people say winter is coming, but now people say winter is here. In the investment field, it is inevitable that they are impacted by what's going on in the world. So I want to raise one question for all the panelists. What is the biggest issue in the investment ecosystem? Would you please share your thoughts? Okay. Regarding the investment ecosystem, I think we need to expand networks with startup-related ministries and departments. According to the Ministry of the SMEs, the biggest challenges of startups are having difficulties with financing. So market penetration and technological development. So small companies, large companies, and public departments and all related stakeholders need to work together. And when you look at the current consortium or cooperation level of relevant parties in Korea, it's not really encouraging. So only 11%, 5% of startups have experienced in working together with other parties. So many large companies should cooperate in further developing startups, I believe. So what is the core issue? So each organization, each department should work together, and we need to engage startup officials. That way we can work together. So I want to give you more specific questions, so please hold on a second. Mr. David?
예.
I'd like to point out issues from global perspective. Before coming to Korea, I was running a startup company. I was there for 14 or 15 years, and I've been here in Korea for about a year. So I have met with various startups in Korea and internationally. There are three major points. First is return on investment. Domestically, the IPO market is easier for startups to be listed and then later exit, but M&A market is about 2%. Perhaps in 2022, there could be increase in the number. However, in the case of China and other countries, after a startup grows in 3 years, then they start M&A. So rather than IPO, they engage more in IPO. So frankly speaking, I don't think this is the problem of the venture capitalists. The problem is the recognition change needs to be done among large corporations and SMEs, and government regulation should also be changed to change the atmosphere. Second is the inviting talents. One Netflix chairman once said that it used to be a video rental service company. In 1997, it started its business. At that time, there were those from Stanford and UC Berkeley. They joined Netflix instead of going to Intel and other companies. But when I came back to Korea and as I met with a lot of startup-related people, still in Korea, smart people who graduated universities would like to join big companies instead of joining startup companies. If they are big companies, Kakao or Naver, which started originally as startups but became big techs. So these are the things we need to think about. Lastly, what about benefits that investors give to startups? In the case of Silicon Valley, investment and other capitalists related to startups are actively engaged in mentorship. One of the major examples is the PayPal. So co-founders and those involved in PayPal were involved in YouTube, SpaceX, and many other corporations. So founders are actually helping founders, and this is a quite desirable situation. So I think this culture should be introduced in Korea. And from the government, on their part, should also support startups and venture startups and CVCs. the government should give us benefits.
So there are many issues, huh? In this session, there's a timer here. So usually, startup businessmen, they pitch their business in front of a timer. So do you often have this kind of opportunity to speak in front of a timer? Mr. Pei, what is the biggest issue in the investment environment? Mr. Pei? I think there's bad internet connectivity. From a practitioner viewpoint, so the capital market is quite rigid. So as a practitioner, as an investor, and venture capital and private equity companies, they often say this. The market is quite rigid. And startup CEOs, they now focus on returns on investment. So they are having a lot of a hard time. The biggest problem is the downsized amount of invested financial resources. We have a bad connectivity right now. So such last investments actually impact the direction. I could only understand half of that because he kept breaking up. We always have a technical glitch. Right now, the topic of this session is actually featuring global economic crisis. This global economic crisis was not caused by startups. So by external shocks, we have such a, liquidity crunch. So startup investments are happening locally, but from global investors, can you share your thoughts as the perspectives of global investor? So local businesses advance to overseas markets, or overseas businesses make investments in domestic businesses. Would you share any ideas about that? Actually, I'm not sure whether I accurately understood your question. From domestic to global market, from global to domestic market. So I need to address those aspects about markets from domestic to global, global to domestic. When I was in the Silicon Valley, I've seen a lot of global startups, but also I met people from domestic startups, Korean homegrown startups. I can't specifically mention the names of those startups, but one of the founders of the startups was really memorable. I couldn't forget him. During the COVID-19 pandemic, this company's value has grown a lot. And in the Silicon Valley, the CEO met with many people and business partners. What I realized from watching that is that whether this market is good or bad, in order to make success in global markets, you need to go back to the basics. When investors make investments, they look at three things. First, the company's technology. Second, fundamentals of the technology of the company. Third is the most important thing personally, whether this company can adapt to new environment quickly. So these three elements are being looked into. So they started their business very well, and they advanced to overseas market. So 2 years ago, the staff was just 20 to 30, but now the number of personnel is about 150. So this company has grown a lot. Due to the COVID-19 pandemic, so among the companies that I invested in, annually, 13 companies became unicorn company. One of them is Plateau company. So this company is running a payment system just like PayPal. So they are running this payment service in Africa. He's just 26 years old, and he says to his potential investors like this, please synergize us by investing in my company. Just in less than a year since the foundation of the company, 250 billion won this company has grown to 250 billion won worth company, about 3.6 trillion won. I guess $250 billion is like, based on USD. So basically what you're saying is that even though the winter is around here, we have a hope that the spring will be back, right? So we can be hopeful. So we didn't cause this risks or crisis. So maybe, we are going to enjoy springtime soon. Now I would like to ask another question, Mr. Kim.
진짜 겨울이 왔는데
So winter is here. So what about startups? What should they do? In this situation, what should be the government's desirable policies? Would you say a word? Recently, there is worsening investment regulation, and the government might reduce the policy budget. Under the situation, investors will focus on their own business to reduce cost, expenditures, and acquire as much as cash as possible. It could be called runway period. The runway period might be extended because of the current situation, and the situation is rapidly changing, so we need to overcome the severe winter season. So existing startup companies, we would like to continue funding these companies regardless of government policies and the current mechanism. Based on commerce and based on figures, if the startup grows rapidly, then we would like to continue to invest in that company. We'll make extra effort to realize this. This might be the same question. Let me rephrase the question. The winter is here, and we have limited food resource. So we have to remain survived until spring comes. But from the perspective of investors, the market has been active and the stocks of startups have been expensive and people have been competing in investment in the market. However, now the stock prices are low, so it could be a vintage year. So on the other hand, the investors can take another action, another attitude, and invest more.
Let me honestly give you some facts. In 1990s, there was a dot-com bubble burst. So many companies collapsed. But there are two companies who grew the most in the dot-com bubble burst. One is Google, the other is Amazon. And in 2016, there were financial crisis. There were nosediving stock prices. In the middle of the crisis, Airbnb and another one, like Korea's Fast Five Light company, WeWork. Thank you for letting me know. So these two companies were created in the middle of the crisis. As I mentioned earlier, in 2020 and 2021, many people were suffering from the pandemic. But out of all those companies that we invested in, 13 companies have grown as unicorn companies. So I think it's the nature of startups. Through crisis, some companies collapse, but some new business opportunities can be identified and some companies can even further grow. So I see many VCs and CVCs domestically and globally. I meet many people. I often hear this from them. How? So what's important is whether startups will receive investment or not. That's not important. So timing of investment, that's the most frequently asked question. So the financial economic situations are really dire, but I believe such crisis will be resolved in 1 or 2 years. So what we really need to take note of is, in the unpredictable situation, how we can address such uncertainties and how can we identify partners who can address those uncertainties and we make optimal or timely investments in them. So we need to endure through this time. We need to persevere through this time. So I read one message about this. So basically the key message from the message is the perseverance. Once you persevere, then opportunity will come. So while reading the message, I realized that I need to remain strong and persevere through these uncertainties, and I'll do my best to save cost and reduce costs. Second, we need to re-evaluate the fundamentals in terms of investment. Do we need to have a good technology? Our teams are running well? Third one is, in the middle of the new uncertainties, how can we quickly re-pivot our position? Lastly, this is the most important thing, personally. When the COVID-19 pandemic broke out, Korea, China, Singapore, these 3 countries experienced the difficulties of COVID-19 pandemic, and they overcame COVID-19 pandemic in different time frames. So Korean companies need to advance to global markets because the timing of the overcoming pandemic varies depending on the country. So you need to conduct a market research about where their pandemic situation is. That way you need to create your own investment strategies. So you need to have your antenna up. That way you can figure out when the spring will come in which market, right? Yes. So since you're not moving, I feel uncomfortable because I'm worried about your internet connectivity.
So under these difficult situations, large companies, CVCs, are increasing. Their investment is increasing as well. From your perspective, the CVC's situation, could you explain CJENM situation, your investment strategy, and so on? The companies are geared toward very big for the previous situation. So under new situations, our response might be slow. However, our organization is relatively small, so we would like to introduce startups can introduce new ideas rapidly, and these are growth engines in the market. When they innovate, they can bring about a lot of benefits to the general public. So from the corporation's perspective, we can collaborate with them. So in this regard, I am a little bit regretful. So under the situation last year, FAIR Act Fair Trade Act was revised, and there has been increased interest in CVC. And our company is also expanding CVC. And this is a general trend. And large companies, as strategic investors, are increasing direct investment. These are, I think, can benefit positively to the operation of startups, and I'm not in a position to discuss our strategy. I think valuation itself is not important, but we would like to identify startup companies who would like to grow together with us, and innovative service and platforms and competitive products. If there are startup companies with appealing products, you can always knock on us. Thank you.
Thank you very much. When you look at startup industry, the startups have many diverse portfolios. So those startup businesses presented their business models, which are quite different from the existing businesses. So they are cultivating new businesses and they are charting new road. And the investment world, investment community is also seeing many new types of investments, and they're seeing the expanded spectrum of investment. So venture capitals and accelerators need to make efforts to ensure diversity. Can I ask for your thoughts about this? Yes, you are correct. We are seeing many new startup companies, and venture capitals and investors who can actually invest in those new types of businesses are required. In the market, there are many VCs who can invest in certain segments of the market, or there are more VCs who can invest in pre-Cs. So from the perspectives of the VCs and CVCs, so we are perceived as a company that invests in large companies, but we create funds for small startups as well. From the creation of a startup until they become a unicorn, we continuously invest. Sometimes in 3 rounds of investments, we inject capital to grow them. So many VCs are evolving right now in Korea, and even in the policy aspects, there are many channels and routes through which investment can be trickled into those small startups. For example, the forestry startups could be good examples. So there are government policies to invest in many different startups. So it is quite changing and evolving right now.
예.
First of all, as you mentioned, over the past few years, when I look at the investment ecosystem, the radical change was there's been blurred boundary between VC and PE. PE people are investing in startups in their early stages. Also, VCs are investing in startups who have grown up to a certain degree to further grow their businesses. Personally, I think this is a positive change. Eventually, for startups to receive investment, their early stage is also important. However, their investment receipt in their later stages are also important. After all, advancement of their services and hiring more people is necessary to grow their businesses further. In that regard, cooperation between PV and VC are important. And if these things come along very well, because of the support of the government regulation, it will be very desirable. And in CJENM and many large companies, they have changed their policies, and I think this is a positive movement. They cannot only invest alone. Investment is important. However, their products, startups' products and services should be utilized by these companies, large companies, and so that they can be commercialized. If it's B2C, for us, for example, through client, for B2C, CJ, Samsung, or LG should take up the responsibility. And if they can create CVC on their own and invest in SI, as well as existing investment, then I think government will encourage and support a lot. And our role as VC is to introduce these startups not only domestically but also internationally to accelerate them. Our VCs as well should invest in good domestic startups and then link them, hook them up with international entities. And you could raise funds as a mediator and then intermediary. And then there can be many things where we can help from the policy perspective. So this will create better information for them to advance into international market.
So in that regard, I have a question. The global economic crisis is underway right now. It's ongoing. From the perspectives of investors, I think you might wonder whether to invest in new startups or continued investment in the existing companies that you have been investing in. With regard to this question, as you mentioned earlier, during the COVID-19 pandemic, we conducted a global research. The findings are pretty interesting. During the pandemic, we make follow investments in companies that are at a sales level. So we continuously reinvest during the pandemic. And let's say there's a startup company who just started, and this startup wants to get investments, but it's very hard for them to secure and obtain financing, right? That they might be facing more difficult situations, right? What's interesting is during the COVID-19 pandemic, sales A and B level startups received a lot more investments. I'm not sure about the domestic situation, but in the global market, right now, the very early stage companies receive more investments, and the startups at sales A and B, C levels receive less investments. It seems like the viable ones and non-viable ones are being separated right now, and I see those changes in the market, and also the policies have impacted such changes as well.
드리고 싶은 말씀.
I have a lot more things to comment, but due to time constraints, I'd like to raise one last question. The sustainable development, I think this is a buzzword, or also ESG and climate change. These are buzzwords and major trend in our society. Are these important factors in the reshaping of the ecosystem of the investment market? Our fund, or our funds to be created in the future, will emphasize the roles of ESG and the importance of these buzzwords have become emerged. However, startups are less aware of these new trends. I understand because they are busy running their own system. However, as investors, I would like to point out these issues so that startup companies can have more awareness of these issues.
From the global perspectives, let me share some of my thoughts. From 2 to 3 years ago, we have been running ESG accelerating program. We call it, as part of the ESG program, we are running sustainability program. Starting from the Silicon Valley, we are expanding such programs to Asian and European countries. So last year alone, we invested in 26 companies. From the global perspectives, ESG is very important, and also the carbon emission rights and trash and waste disposal to turn the waste into energy resources. There will be growing demands for that. And in this regard, we are more aware of that. We have heightened perceptions of those needs. So there are public officials who are responsible for ESG responsibilities. So they might be able to come up with benefits and incentives that will incentivize those ESG practicing companies. Mr. Baek?
From the perspective of corporations, in the case of CJENM, we are focusing a lot on ESG, also from strategic perspective as well. And from the investment perspective, we have invested in one startup company, and the startup company is developing ESG area. And our company is providing a subsidy for the startups to develop ESG areas. So in the future, the buzzword will be talked about more, and our company considers it very important. So we will develop together with startups in this area. Thank you.
When winter comes, the big concern is how to spend winter time. For farmers, they have a principle. They are not going to eat seeds no matter how hungry they are. So there are startups at the seeding stage, and they are very important for the Korean startup industry. Because of the economic crisis and economic difficulties, seeding startups shouldn't be given up on. So policymakers and public officials, please pay attention to these companies which are at the seeding level. Are there any questions from the floor or from the online participants? Are there any questions? Are you looking forward to drawing lots for gifts? So I'd like to conclude the panelist discussion session with this. Thank you. The startups are the main players in the digital economy, and how to boost investments in startups, and also ESG issues were explored. So we often talked about spring and winter. So while waiting for spring, we heard a lot of strategies and insights about how to endure and persevere through winter. So with this, I'd like to officially close the Digital Economy Forum. Thank you very much for staying with us for such a long time. In order to overcome the global economic crisis, digital economy has a lot of impact on society. And also, in order for Korea to become a digital leading country, there are many issues: inclusiveness and startup investments. There are many issues. A host of issues were covered at this forum. I hope today's forum was an opportunity for all the participants to expand their horizon of understanding of the digital economy. I hope The Digital Economy Forum will continue to offer a venue for productive discussions on the digital economy and digital technology. I'll look forward to your continued interest and attention to the next year's Digital Economy Forum. So we are going to draw lots for gifts, so please stay with us until the end. And also those who completed surveys, we are going to draw lots for winners to give away presents to the winners. So your survey results are very important. Your feedback will be reflected for us to prepare a better forum. So you see QR codes here on the screen. So you can scan the QR code to participate in the survey. This is the really final closing remarks. With this, I'd like to declare closed the 5th Digital Economy Forum. I'd like to thank all the participants who have been here with us in person and virtually. Thank you.